Outsourcing continues to be a significant way in which businesses deliver their services. In this session, Richard Smith answers some of the most important questions. Richard, outsourcing still remains popular. What are the benefits of outsourcing?
The real benefits of outsourcing is the ability to enable the client or the customer to concentrate on their core business so that effectively they can ensure that their day-to-day services or back-office services are being performed by a third-party supplier who obviously is an expert in their area.
And what are the business drivers behind outsourcing?
Those have changed somewhat, and also recently with the focus on cost reduction and the need for innovation. But I think the main business driver, especially in the 90s when outsourcing became very popular, was about focusing on core business and reducing the cost base. Whereas now I think people want more innovation. Not only do they want innovation, but they want improvement and transformation.
In relation to outsourcing, I hear the phrases Opex and Capex. What do they mean, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of either of them?
Capital expenditure is normally associated with the purchase of an asset, and that purchase is then depreciated over quite a long time normally. Whereas operational expenditure, or Opex, is something which can be used each month and also acknowledged by the business and reduced within the accounting each month.
Another phrase I've heard is multi-sourcing. What is multi-sourcing?
Multi-sourcing is where you've got more than one vendor involved in the provision of outsourced services. And this is something which we're seeing an awful lot of at the moment, especially as clients are trying to reduce their over-reliance on a particular service provider. And often they're doing that in order to, as part of their business continuity strategy, but also as a way of really trying to leverage as much competition and reduction in fee costs as they can.
Obviously in outsourcing, the service specification is key. What trends are you seeing in the developments of service specifications?
I'm pleased to report that we're seeing a significant move away from what was classically called the input-based specifications. And this is where a client or a customer would specify in significant detail exactly what they wanted the service provider to do. But the issues with that is that on an input-based specification, it encouraged little or no innovation because the service provider was contractually bound to provide the services in the way that the client had specified. The real trend that we're seeing in terms of the service specification is one which is focused more today on an output-based specification, so more about specifying what it is the business wants and not how you want the service provider to provide that service. And that really starts to encourage service providers to think creatively and innovatively about how they should be providing the services to their customer.
Centralised procurement teams seem to be much more common. Are you finding them helpful?
They are extremely helpful, and I personally am a real advocate of centralised procurement teams because I think they help a more efficient procurement process, because quite often they know where service providers are, not just on the key commercial terms, but also on the key legal terms. So it means that we can often have a fairly focused negotiating strategy from day one and just focus on those areas which are key to the business. The other thing that they bring with them is also experience of knowing where the service providers are on key things such as service levels, on key things such as service credits, but also as well they know where the weak points are with each of the service providers, and they can test those during the procurement process.
Of course, the quality of service delivered by the provider is important. What changes are you seeing in service level agreements?
The real changes we're seeing in service level agreements is the focus on fewer service levels, and though that focus on fewer service levels enables both the customer and the service provider to focus on what's important to the delivery of those services, there's a real move away from having many service levels, some of which were and were not relevant to the service provision.
Of course, many clients outsourced many of their services. Are you seeing some of those clients bringing their services back in-house?
I don't think there is a trend towards insourcing. I have worked on 1 or 2 deals about bringing services back in-house, but that's really where possibly the client really needed to take control back and bring those services back in-house in order to get a better understanding of what that service was, especially in those areas such as accounts receivable, accounts payable, where really you don't want to be outsourcing the entire service. You need to make sure you've got good control over that service. I think with the focus on cost reduction, the focus on, or the needs rather, to be seen to be procuring those services in the most effective way, I think outsourcing is here to stay.
How long do you expect outsourcing agreements to last these days?
Outsourcing agreements typically, especially in the IT services sector, used to be anywhere between 10 and 15 years. The reason being is that they required a lot of investment on behalf of the service provider that needed to be effectively amortised over a longer period. And also people didn't want to go through the pain again in the short term, so wanted a relatively long-term arrangement. Now, as customers, or particularly as businesses, need to be more agile, the longer term agreements are a thing of the past, and we're seeing more agreements between 5 and 7 years.
What are the ways in which outsourcing agreements can terminate?
The one thing I'm seeing more and more time spent on is termination for convenience, both identifying when you want the right to terminate for your convenience, whether it be 3 years after the initial term of the contract, but also what are the costs of exercising that right of termination, because quite often people don't want to go through the hurdles of trying to prove or identify a breach situation, especially in a long-term relationship where the service levels and the services are susceptible to change. Sometimes the business needs to exit out of an arrangement because it's ultimately it's the best thing for that business to do.
We have some new data protection regulations. What impact do these have on outsourcing?
The way that they're really going to impact on outsourcing depends on what you've outsourced. If you've outsourced a function with a significant data protection element to it, where you're processing lots of personal data, then I think what you're going to see is those services potentially become more expensive. The reason being is now data processors are now going to have direct obligations under the data protection regulations that they didn't have under the existing Data Protection Act, and that's going to mean that they're going to want to pass those costs of compliance on to customers.
As an in-house lawyer looking at an outsourcing arrangement, what issues should I really be thinking about?
I think if you're an in-house lawyer today, and an in-house lawyer that's focused or working with a business that's looking at outsourcing, it's trying to think, what is the strategy for outsourcing? How long do you want the relationship to be with your vendor? When do you want to get out? Are you over-reliant on your vendor? And most importantly, do you have sufficient knowledge about the outsourced service to effectively manage that vendor, so that that vendor is not running your business, but they are supporting it as you would want in the contract?